I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the sirens. Not one, not two. Three police cars came skidding onto my gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust so thick it looked like I was about to get raided by a SWAT team. I blinked. The only crime happening on my property was me trying to drink my coffee in peace. Then out of one of the cop cars, stomping like she was leading a military raid, came the last person I expected. A short, furious woman clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her oversized sunglasses perched on her face like she was trying to hide from the law, rather than calling them. And then, in the loudest, most entitled voice imaginable, she screeched, "This man has an illegal electric fence. He's endangering the entire community." I didn't even live in her community. It took me a second to process what was happening. The cops, who looked just as confused as I felt, were already fanning out, like they were about to uncover a major crime scene. Meanwhile, I stood there in my pajama pants, coffee in one hand, absolutely dumbfounded. This woman, who I recognized from my neighbor's drunken rants as HOA Karen, wasn't even from my neighborhood. Her HOA didn't even reach this far, but that didn't seem to matter to her. She was already pointing dramatically at my fence, warning the officers about its dangerous, inhumane nature. Now, to be fair, my fence was electric, but it wasn't some cartoonishly overpowered fry a person to a crisp kind of thing. It was a standard livestock electric fence, the kind farmers use to keep coyotes and stray dogs from messing with their animals. Perfectly legal. Not even strong enough to harm anything bigger than a raccoon. And most importantly, absolutely none of Karen's business. One of the officers, who already looked like he was done with this nonsense, turned to me. "Sir, we got a call about an illegal hazard on your property." I sighed, taking a sip of my coffee before answering. "You mean my fence?" The officer nodded. I gestured to it. "It's legal. I've got all the permits." "Want to see?" Karen let out an outraged gasp. "He's lying!" she shrieked, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "I have photographic proof that this fence is a death trap. What if children wander onto his land? What if someone's pet gets fried?" I glanced at the officer, who looked exhausted already. "Does she even live around here?" I asked, motioning vaguely at Karen, who was practically vibrating with rage. The officer sighed. "Number she's from the HOA, 2 miles away." I set my coffee down on my porch railing and rubbed my temples. "Anna, so why is she here?" Karen's jaw dropped like I had personally insulted her ancestors. "Because your fence affects our property values," she shrieked. "It's ugly. It's dangerous. I will not allow this kind of negligence to ruin our community." One of the younger officers coughed, probably to cover a laugh. The older cop pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. "Ma'am," he said in the universal tone of someone who deeply regretted his career choices, "this man's property is not in your HOA's jurisdiction." Karen looked personally offended by the concept of laws not bending to her will. "But it's still near our community," she argued, "and I refuse to let some hillbilly play mad scientist with high-voltage fences." I was about to explain that my fence barely delivered a tickle when, as if on cue, my neighbor's goat, Lightning, trotted up to the fence. Now, Lightning wasn't the brightest creature in the world. He had a habit of getting into places he shouldn't, and an even worse habit of testing his limits. Before anyone could react, the goat stuck his nose on the fence and got a tiny zap. Just a little one, enough to make him jump back in surprise. Karen screamed like she had just witnessed a murder. The officers and I just stood there watching as Lightning, completely unfazed, flicked his tail and wandered off like nothing happened. Karen clutched her chest like she was about to faint. Did you see that?" she gasped. "An innocent animal, shocked. He could have died." The officer, who had been holding back a laugh earlier, was now openly smirking. "Ma'am," he said, barely containing his amusement, "it's a livestock fence. It's designed to keep animals safe from predators. That goat just learned not to touch it." Karen's face turned red. "I don't care. This is unacceptable. I demand you arrest him for animal cruelty." The lead officer turned to me with the expression of a man who had seen some truly stupid things in his life. But this was breaking new records. "Sir," he asked, sounding almost apologetic, "do you want to press harassment charges?" Karen made a strangled noise. "Harassment? Me? I'm the victim here." I let out a long sigh, then turned to the officers. Nah, I'll pass. I'd rather just get back to drinking my coffee. Karen gaped at me, completely outraged that I wasn't playing along with her insane power trip. This isn't over, she screeched before storming back to her SUV. Her rant was cut off as she tripped over her own feet and nearly face-planted into the dirt. I didn't laugh. Okay, I did. The officers didn't even try to hide their amusement. One of them gave me a polite nod before they all turned back to their cars, clearly eager to leave this madness behind. As the last cruiser pulled away, Karen, now red-faced and fuming, climbed into her SUV and sped off, kicking up even more dust than the police had. I watched her go, shaking my head. Crazy lady, I muttered, picking up my coffee. That was the end of it, or so I thought, because 2 days later, I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed with fake violation notices from an HOA I didn't even belong to. And that's when I knew Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. 2 days after Karen's dramatic police meltdown, I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed to the brim with papers. At first, I thought it was junk mail, maybe some overzealous credit card offers. But as I pulled out the stack, I realized these weren't just random letters. They were official-looking notices, stamped with an HOA logo, an HOA that I did not, under any circumstances, belong to. I flipped through them, feeling my blood pressure rise with each page. Violation notices, fines, threats of legal action, claims that my property was out of compliance with neighborhood aesthetics, warnings that if I didn't remove my hazardous fencing, I would face escalating penalties and possible liens. I actually laughed out loud at that last one. These people had zero authority over my land. They might as well have been sending me monopoly money fines. Shaking my head, I walked back inside and tossed the ridiculous paperwork onto the counter. I had a few options here. Ignore them. Tempting. Lawyer up. Probably inevitable. Have some fun with this. Now that was an idea. Because if Karen thought she could intimidate me with empty threats, she had another thing coming. Later that day, I decided to pay a visit to Old Man Harris, my neighbor and the unofficial historian of local gossip. I found him sitting on his porch, sipping a beer, while Lightning the goat chewed lazily on an old boot. I dropped the stack of HOA nonsense onto the table beside him. "You won't believe this," I said. He squinted at the papers, then let out a wheezing laugh. "Oh, they really don't know when to quit, do they?" "She's sending me fines from an HOA I'm not even a part of," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't think that was even legal." Harris chuckled, taking another sip of his beer. "It's not," he said, "but that never stopped Karen before." I raised an eyebrow. "She's done this before?" Harris leaned back in his chair, looking entirely too amused by the situation. "Son, Karen's been running that HOA like a damn dictatorship for the last 10 years. Tried to fine a guy for having the wrong shade of blue on his front door. Threatened to sue a family because their kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk decreased property values. Even tried to have a retired veteran evicted from his own house because he put up an American flag without HOA approval." I whistled. "And no one stopped her?" "Oh, plenty of people tried," Harris said, "but Karen's the type who thrives on conflict. The second someone pushes back, she goes nuclear." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Well, I'm not in her HOA, so she can threaten me all she wants. She has zero legal ground." Harris nodded. "That won't stop her," he warned. "If she can't scare you with fake fines, she'll try something else." He wasn't wrong. A few days later, the next phase of Karen's insanity began. The Facebook smear campaign. This time, she wasn't just sending fake fines. She was waging a full-scale misinformation war. I started getting calls from people I didn't even know. Concerned strangers asking if my fence had electrocuted a dog. A woman from some animal rights group leaving a furious voicemail, accusing me of running an electric death trap. Confused, I did some digging and found out that Karen had started a Facebook campaign against me. She had posted a completely fake and heavily edited video claiming my fence was killing animals. She even threw in stock footage of an electrocuted squirrel, probably pulled straight from the internet, to make it look like it happened on my property. The comments section was a disaster. "This is disgusting. How is this man allowed to get away with this?" We need to petition the county to shut this down immediately. Won't someone think of the children? I almost had to admire her dedication. Almost. Instead, I called my lawyer. While I waited for a legal response, Karen's harassment escalated again. The late-night trespassing attempt. She wasn't content with just spreading lies. Now she was actively trying to frame me for animal cruelty. One evening, I caught movement on my security cameras. Someone sneaking onto my property near the fence line. I checked the footage and nearly burst out laughing. It was Karen, dressed in all black, crouching dramatically like a cartoon villain, dragging a dog crate with her. From the looks of it, she was trying to release a small animal near my fence, probably to get it shocked and record a new expose. Unfortunately for her, things did not go as planned. As she tried to open the crate, she tripped over a rock and landed face first in the dirt. Then, in poetic justice, she accidentally backed into my fence. The zap was barely strong, but the way she shrieked and flailed, like she'd been hit by a bolt of lightning, was pure gold. She staggered around, cursing, before giving up entirely and running back to her car. I saved the footage immediately. The next morning, I sent a copy to my lawyer, the county animal control, and just for fun, posted a small, carefully edited clip online. Nothing too aggressive, just a simple caption. When your neighbor trespasses on your land at night and finds out electric fences work as advertised. The video went viral within hours. Thousands of people laughing at Karen's antics. Comments ranging from, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen," to "How do we nominate this woman for the Darwin Awards?" And just like that, her credibility took a major hit. But she wasn't done, because 2 nights later, someone tried to cut my fence. This time, they weren't just sneaking around with a camera. They had wire cutters, gloves, a clear intent to destroy. Fortunately, my cameras caught them in the act, and the sheriff's department didn't take kindly to trespassers with vandalism on their minds. Karen was about to learn a very important lesson, and I was going to make sure she never forgot it. Karen had already lied, trespassed, and tried to frame me for animal cruelty. But when she sent her minions to cut my fence, that was the last straw. They had gloves, wire cutters, a clear intent to destroy. Unfortunately for them, my cameras caught everything. By the time I woke up, the sheriff's department had already seen the footage, and they were not amused. The sheriff comes knocking. That morning, I had an unexpected visitor. Karen, furious, red-faced, and wearing a bandage on her wrist. She barely let me open the door before she started screaming. "How dare you!" she shrieked. "You set me up!" I stared at her. "What?" "You put that video online to humiliate me," she accused, pointing a finger at me like she was declaring war. "I demand you take it down immediately." I crossed my arms. "Oh, you mean the video where you were illegally on my property, trying to frame me for animal cruelty?" Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "It was a social experiment. I almost choked." What?" she huffed, crossing her arms like she'd just given me an airtight legal defense. "To test the reaction of the community to unethical animal treatment." I blinked at her. "So you admit you trespassed?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That's not the point," I smirked. "It is when the sheriff sees the footage." For the first time, Karen actually looked nervous. "You wouldn't," I grinned. "Try me." For a long moment, she just stood there fuming. Then, without another word, she stomped off toward her car. I watched her go, shaking my head. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The last straw. The next morning, my security cameras caught something even worse. Karen's HOA minions had snuck onto my property, spray paint in hand, defacing my barn. They scrawled the words HOA rules across the side in giant, ugly letters. That was it. I called the cops, sent them the footage, and by morning, Karen and her crew were getting a not-so-friendly visit from law enforcement. This time, she wasn't able to talk her way out of it. The officers found paint cans in the back of her car, along with a handwritten list of targets she planned to vandalize. She was arrested on the spot for trespassing and property damage. The fallout with Karen facing criminal charges, the HOA turned on her faster than a pack of hungry wolves. Residents who had put up with her nonsense for years finally spoke out. The board, desperate to save face, held an emergency meeting and voted her out. Her supporters vanished overnight. The same people who once cowered under her rule were now leading the charge to erase every trace of her influence. And me? I sat back, cracked open a cold beer, and enjoyed the show. A week later, Karen officially put her house on the market. She couldn't handle the humiliation. She packed up, left town, and as far as I know, she hasn't been seen since. On the day she drove away, I stood on my porch, watching as her SUV disappeared down the road. Old man Harris walked up beside me, nodding in approval. Reckon that's the last we'll hear of her. Let's hope, I replied. Lightning the goat wandered over, eyeing the fence like he was thinking about testing it again. I chuckled and patted his head. Not today, buddy. As I took another sip of my drink, I glanced at my fence. Still standing strong, still completely legal, and, most importantly, still none of Karen's business. Lesson learned. Some people fight for power. Some people fight for justice. Me? I just wanted my damn fence.